Hi everyone, my name is Adam, and I will be your speaker today. Today, we will be talking about evidence. So what is evidence? Evidence is facts, information, or sources that prove or disprove claims. So let's give an example here. We need to end the death penalty because it disproportionately hurts racial minorities. This argument can be supported by the following evidence. A professor of criminal law in a research paper from 2010 states that black people are 10 times more likely to be sentenced to death than white people. This is an example of evidence because it is a research paper that is conducted by a professor. So why is evidence important? Well, they're important for a few reasons. First is that it can prove your argument or prove your claim. It could also disprove your opponent's arguments. It can also determine the strength of arguments by comparing one argument with another. It can also add on to arguments by providing more insight or more warrants to an argument. So now let's talk about how to find evidence. There are multiple types of evidence that you can find. This includes research papers, books, interviews, and even news articles. Of course, there are other kinds of evidence that you can find out there, but these four are the main ones that people use. There's a variety of places where you can find evidence. There is a variety.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, there are a variety.
No, it's a variety.
There is a variety.
There are sources. There is a variety.
There are a variety of sources. There is
What?
a variety of source.
There is a variety of sources. One variety. One variety.
Wait, no, that's giving you like one source. Wait.
You seriously gonna search that up?
Hey, we need to be professional, okay? This is an educational institution. We must be
Dedicated to promoting educational equality.
So it's a variety of sources.
Yeah. So in order to search for evidence, you can go to a variety of different places, including Google. But I would recommend a better version of Google, which is Google Scholar, and the link is down in the description. You could also use sources of sources, which basically, if you find the citations for a source that you find, it could be links to other sources that may help you. Another thing you could do to narrow your search results could be Google's advanced search. You could narrow it down in terms of language, region, update, site or domain, and etc. This helps you search for the things that you want without having to worry about getting spammed by articles that no one wants. And the last advice I would want to give is go to the second page of Google. It is a place where no one wants to go. But in fact, you can find a lot of important things there. Other places where you can find evidence include Britannica, Wikipedia, and the Onion.com.
No, don't.
And the next thing I want to talk about is keywords. So how do you search for relevant evidence that is relevant to your argument or relevant to the point you're trying to make? Well, you should only search the subject or the most important words. So, for example, if you're arguing that the death penalty is bad, you should probably only search up death penalty bad. Another piece of advice I have for you is don't just copy your argument and paste it on Google and just search it up. You should enunciate it in a way that makes it clear to Google what terms you want to appear on the sources you're trying to find. And the last piece of advice I have for you is And the last thing I want you to know is do not use Wikipedia. Wikipedia may be useful for everyday knowledge, but it is not a good source of credible information as it is written by anonymous users and sometimes may not contain all the facts. And so now we will be moving onto evidence credibility. So how can someone determine how credible a source is? You should look for the following things. First is author. Who wrote the source or who made the source? Are they professors, journalists, research fellows, or anonymous? If it's anonymous, you should probably not use that source. And the second most important thing is the point of view. Does the author or the publisher of the article or source have biases? Are they left or right leaning? What kinds of beliefs do they hold? These things affect how they write whatever they write. You should also identify whether it's a primary, secondary, or tertiary source. Additionally, you should look at the date of publication. Is it recent or is it outdated? Because sometimes the information is no longer relevant when some time has passed. For example, if you read an article about Trump will win the election back in 2019, this is definitely not relevant because the election is already over and Biden has already won. Another thing you should look at is the credibility of the website you're visiting. Web addresses that end with .org or .edu are often great. .com sometimes. If possible, you should also look into the mission statement or description of the website you're visiting. This can often be found on the About page in their website. And the last thing that determines the credibility of the sources is looking for the citations that it uses. Does it cite credible sources? Does the data that it is presenting credible? Is it true? Is it backed by a credible research paper? Now that we have talked about the do's, let's talk about the don'ts. First thing you shouldn't do is lie about what's in your evidence. The second thing you shouldn't do is name the evidence something it isn't talking about, otherwise known as shadow tagging. The third thing you shouldn't do is reading what's not in evidence and saying that it is in the evidence. In other words, card clipping. The last thing is not citing or giving credit to the evidence you are reading. This is especially important because you want the reader of your argument to know that your source is credible, as well as know that your argument is fully supported with a credible source. So now, let's look at an example of a piece of evidence. This piece of evidence is from Salman Zafar, from March 17, 2020. He is the founder of Ecomina and an international consultant, advisor, ecopreneur, and journalist with expertise in waste management, waste to energy, renewable energy, environment protection, and sustainable development. The question I want to ask is this author credible? Well, first we need to know what Ecomina is. He has founded an organization in the Middle East and North Africa that advocates for environmental sustainability and raise awareness. This is a relatively large organization, which gives us reason to believe that it is probably credible. However, he is not a professor, meaning he does not have full credibility. But since he is a journalist with expertise in the topics that he talks about in the article, we can say that he is a credible source because he knows what he's talking about. So now let's get to the evidence. Climate change has been established as an event that is changing everyone's lives. Online education reduces electrical use. Online classes means that students aren't traversing hallways and sitting in classes. They are instead accessing a custom-made website from home. The lights are often in those rooms not in use. That means that the buildings on campus are using less electricity, which is better for the environment. Paperless offices are the best to reducing the number of trees fallen every year. Online classes make using paper almost impossible, as all the materials that students need have to be accessible online. Essays and tests are done electronically rather than in person. Online classes mean a paperless class for an essay, reviews, or just to do the best writing they can, and that will save dozens, if not hundreds of trees every year. So how do we make an argument out of this evidence? Well, we can identify two arguments here. The first is that online education reduces electrical use, and the second is that online classes reduce paper use. So let's identify the warrants, the impacts, and basically the whole chain of the argument. The claim is obviously online education reduces electrical use. The warrant, as described in the highlighted portions, says that online classes mean that students don't use the hallways or the rooms. They are in their home using a website. This means that the lights are off at the school and no electricity is being used at the school, only online. And the impact is that using less electricity is good for the environment. And I think we both know why. And the second claim Zafar makes is that online classes make using paper almost impossible. And the warrant for that is in the same sentence, as all the materials that students need have to be accessible online. He further explains that essays and tests and basically every other assignment is done electronically, meaning nothing is on paper. So the impact of this argument is that this will save dozens, if not hundreds of trees every year. Because without using paper, you don't buy paper. That means the production of paper decreases. And with that, you can see how you can analyze a piece of evidence and come up with arguments. Even if you just began with one argument, by looking for evidence, you can find more. In this evidence, there's two arguments made, but I was only looking for one, which is an extra benefit. So let's summarize the key points that we talked about today. Some important things to remember include that when you're finding evidence, you should be using the correct websites, not theonion.com, not Wikipedia. You should ensure that it's credible by looking at the various things included in a source, such as author, date, citations. You should be also searching for the correct things by typing the correct keywords and avoiding things that you do not want. After you find the evidence, to analyze it or use it, you should identify the arguments as being made in the source. You should then analyze the arguments and find out why that argument is made and what results from the argument, i.e. the impact. And the last thing I want you to know is that you can make the arguments your own. After you identify the arguments made in the source, you can say these arguments and back it up with a source that you have just found. This makes your argument credible and reliable. Thank you for attending today's lecture, and we hope to see you in future videos.